All right, I see that people are joining us. If you want to let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from today, you can go ahead and do that. Drop that information in the chat. We'd love to see where everybody's tuning in from today. Thank you for tuning in to the virtual speaker series. We will be going live in just a few minutes. Again, if you're just joining us, let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from. You can use the chat on the bottom of your Zoom video window to share that information. I see William from Cranberry Township. Welcome in, William, a World Campus student. Good to have you on the virtual speaker series. I see Joe from Penn State Shenango. I see Suzanne from Virginia Beach. Good to see you on the virtual speaker session. We're going to get started here in just a minute with Dr. Pete Allison. I see Bill in Hermitage and Josh in Nashua, New Hampshire. Thank you for joining. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and welcome to today's virtual speaker session, which is being recorded. Live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of the Zoom video window, and then clicking Show Subtitle. You may also customize your caption view by clicking the stream to text link posted in the chat. We are live streaming today's discussion, and the presentation will be archived and available on our website after the event. This afternoon, we welcome Dr. Pete Allison, who will discuss his work with Outward Bound and the research that is focused on different conceptions of character across the 35 different countries involved with the program. Outward Bound is the oldest and largest outdoor experiential education program in the world, and its enduring educational initiative established in 1941 by Kurt Hahn and Lawrence Holt. Outward Bound is as relevant today as it has as ever, as the way character is conceptualized across different cultures is increasingly important as we live in a more diverse community. Dr. Allison has a long history working with Outward Bound. Prior to his time at Penn State, Pete worked with Outward Bound in Malaysia, Oman, and UNESCO, in addition to working as an academic at the University of Edinburgh. He has contributed extensively to the literature on outdoor experiential learning and is the director of the Kurt Hahn Consortium for Values and Experiential Learning, which brings together researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to engage in a more meaningful dialogue around Kurt Hahn's legacy organizations. Dr. Allison is passionate about skiing, mountaineering, canoeing, and just this morning completed another CrossFit workout here in State College. He lives in Nashville with his fiancee Jill and her 2 children. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pete Allison. Pete, how are you today?
Hi, Paul. I'm very well. Thanks very much for the kind introduction. It's great to be here.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining this webinar. I really appreciate everybody joining, and I'd love to know if anybody on the call has been on an Outward Bound course or has experience. So if you'd like to pop that into the chat, it'd be great to see. It's always nice to kind of know who you're talking to and who's on the call. So I'd love to hear that if anybody's done an Outward Bound course. I'm going to share my screen and see if we can see if the technology is kind to us. Hopefully you can now see a slide on the screen. If not, I'm hoping that Paul or James might interrupt me and tell me that that's not the case. So I'm going to talk this morning about a project that we've just started working on. And I'm going to really split the talk into 2 halves. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Outward Bound because I think it's useful and I'm hoping that people will find it interesting. I find it fascinating. So hopefully that will be of interest to people. And then I'm going to say a little bit about the research project, which you can see the title on the screen right now, Learning from 8 Decades of Global Character Training. I'm not going to read every slide here, and I'm going to kind of go through quite a few slides, some of which have just got pictures on, just to kind of set the scene, and hopefully this will be of interest to people. If not, I'd love to hear why not, and if it is of interest, I'd love to hear about that as well. So I want to start by talking a little bit about Kurt Hahn. Kurt Hahn was the founder of Outward Bound, and I became interested in him really early on in my career because it's very difficult to work in the outdoors and in outdoor education without coming across this name and this person's legacy, Kurt Hahn. But I became interested in knowing really what it was that motivated him and what he thought about and what he was interested in, beyond the kind of, if you like, the headlines. And the main headline that I came across, and that continues to be the main headline around Kurt Hahn and the founding of Outward Bound and the Outward Bound movement around the world, is on the screen right now. So it was during World War II, and some of his observations led him to this idea that younger sailors hadn't had enough life experience to survive the horrors of war and to survive, particularly in boats that were torpedoed. And so he thought that those younger people needed to have their character built, or they needed to build their tenacity or their strength or their perseverance, or as we might call it today, grit. All of those kinds of words were things that he was interested in. And when I started to look into this kind of history of Kurt Hahn, what I found was that he was this was all true, and yet there was a much more nuanced or sophisticated or expansive kind of view that he held and that really motivated him throughout his life. And that's what I got really interested in. So there was all of that part about the lifeboats is true, and he was interested in inclusion, as we might call it today. He didn't really use that word, but he was interested in including and creating educational opportunities for everybody and anybody in society. And he was interested in expanding those opportunities to incorporate what we would now probably call extracurricular activities or out of school activities, that kind of thing. And most of all, I've come to think of him as a politician of sorts. He was a kind of education reformer politician. And his kind of views sit very closely in many respects with those of John Dewey, if anybody's familiar with his work and his legacy of educational philosophy. But what I started to do was to understand his work as a response to what was happening in society, and tried to put that into a kind of social context, if you like, of what was happening in the 20s. And looking at his life very briefly, and obviously we don't have an enormous amount of time here, so I'm just going to kind of jump through a few of these kind of headlines, if you like. Hahn was born in Germany. He was born to Jewish parents, and if you think about the timing of that becomes very important in his life story. He studied classical philosophy at Berlin, Heidelberg, Freiburg, Göttingen in Sweden, and also at Oxford. He and I always enjoy talking to students about this. He studied in all these places, but he never completed a degree. He was conferred an honorary doctorate later in his life, but he never completed a degree. But he came from a family where study was very highly valued. And during the First World War, he was the private secretary to Prince Max of Baden. Now, this was interesting. So Prince Max of Baden was the equivalent of the kind of the president of the country or the king of the country. And he was the private secretary. And his job during the latter part of the First World War was to translate some of what was happening in the press across different countries for the prince. And at the end of the First World War, he started up a school called Salem School in Bavaria in southern Germany, which is still in operation today. And in fact, a few years ago, I met a student from there and visited there. They started that school, and in 1933, and I think the timing of this history is really interesting. I'll try not to talk too much about it because of time, but he spoke out against Hitler, and he spoke out and he said, alumni from Salem School, you are either for Salem or you're for Hitler, but you can't be for both. And as a result, he was imprisoned by Hitler, and he spent 10 days in prison, and then he some of his political connections helped him to get out and go to the UK. And at that time, he then started Gordonston School in the north of Scotland. Now, different interpretations of this. Some people might say he was a pain, and so people sent him as far away as possible to the north of Scotland to start a school and to give them peace. But what he did at Gordonston was remarkable. And if there are any fans of The Crown, the Netflix series, you might be familiar with Gordonston because it's where most of the royal family are educated and is held in extremely high regard. But his work, Hahn's work, to just kind of jump around a little bit, was focused on addressing decays. And Hahn identified 5 different decays in society. And if we were in a room together, which would obviously be much nicer for all of us, I would ask you to nod or to give me some kind of thumbs up if you thought that these decays were still relevant today. We can't do that, but maybe just think about this as we go through. The decay of fitness due to our modern methods of locomotion. Now, normally when I ask people in a room, there's a lot of nods for that. We spend too much time driving. We don't spend enough time walking. We tend to rely on technology much more. The decay of self-discipline helped by stimulants and tranquilizers. So he was very much about this kind of stiff upper lip and developing self-discipline, mostly through physical fitness. Decay of enterprise, and this is one of my favorite words, due to the widespread disease of spectatoritis. I think that's such a great word, and I think certainly it's a struggle in our household. We spend too much time watching television, and children spend a lot of time watching television or on screens and that kind of thing. The decay of skill and care helped by the decline in craftsmanship. So he's very keen on this idea of mastery and developing crafts and skills and pride in our work. And then finally, the decay of compassion, which William Temple called a spiritual death. So, and a lot of people who work in organizations that were inspired by Hahn talk about compassion and about this being one of the kind of backbones, if you like, of his philosophy. So he started Gordonston. This is an early photograph of Gordonston. And for those of you who are as geographically challenged as I am, here's a map of Europe, and you can see in the top left corner of that, you can see the United Kingdom. And this is a better picture of the UK. Gordonston School is up near the Red Arrow there in the north of Scotland, and Outward Bound was started in Aberdyfi in North Wales, which is where the second arrow, the lower of the two arrows, is, and that's to this day there's an Outward Bound school there, and there are now lots of Outward Bound schools all around the world. But what Hahn did at Gordonston was really inspirational, and I think now as we kind of look back on it, we can see it in a completely different light. So he was a big fan of what we would now call project-based learning, and for him that just meant the first two students that went to Gordonston, who were both children of very famous people, their job was to build a boat each. And they built a boat. It took them 2 years to build these boats. You can see them. This is one of those two boats on the left. And on the right, this is the maiden voyage of the Mansfield Coming, which was named after Kurt Hahn's aunt. And this is the launch of that boat by the boys at that time after 2 years of building. This is them about to go on their voyage, and this is the maiden voyage of those two boats. The other one was named after the head of the Secret Service at the time, which of course to me is very appealing as a James Bond fan. So Hahn developed this kind of idea of using the outdoors to address those decays, and he thought that this was a really good way of helping people to not be involved in spectatoritis, but be active participants, and to engage in whether it was camping, or they then used those boats to sail across the North Sea, which, if anybody's done that, you'll know it's no small task in and of itself. And then undertake journeys in Lapland and do fun things like this, which I'm not quite sure how they managed to catch this reindeer. But they then did these expeditions in Lapland and in Scandinavia, which was all part of the boys' education. The other thing that they did as part of their education, Hahn was a big believer in service. And so as part of their schooling, all boys, and it was at that time an all boys school, had to be involved in one of the local service organizations. Here you can see the fire brigade team, which I think looks like great fun. I would have loved to have done something like that when I was at school. But he believed that this service had to be genuine service, and they were the service, that they were the fire service, and they also did the sea service as well for rescuing sea rescue boats as well in the Moray Firth, where the school is located. So I think, to me, this is a really interesting educational philosophy. And what I then looked towards was trying to identify what it was that this was really about and what the principles were underneath it. And one of the things that's interesting about Hahn is that he didn't leave very much written material, but he left lots of practices and minutes of meetings and some speeches. And so I had to do a lot of digging around to find out more about some of the kind of the deeper part of Hahn. And what I found was that all of his organizations are really based on 7 laws of Salem, which he developed straight after the First World War, and they continue into Gordonston, and they can be traced into Outward Bound and also into round square schools in United World colleges, which were all inspired by Hahn. So give children the opportunity for self-discovery. I'm sure you can see that in lots of the pictures that we've just looked at there. I particularly like this one, make the children meet with triumph and defeat. So the idea of failure is just as important as it is success, because he believed that was good preparation for life and learning how to deal with defeat. Give the children the opportunity for self-effacement in the common cause. So to put others and to put the group first, provide periods of silence, and we can still see that practice solos or meditations as part of a lot of Outward Bound courses. If anybody on the call has done an Outward Bound course, you'll be familiar with the solo. Well, this is where it comes from in the 1920s. Train the imagination, make games important but not predominant, and free the sons of the wealthy and the powerful from the enervating sense of privilege. So he saw that education of this kind was important for everybody. It wasn't only for example, people from poorer backgrounds or less well-off backgrounds. And that was then translated, if you like, in the future in 1956, when the Duke of Edinburgh Award started, which is the international award around the world, was translated into the 4 pillars, which are physical fitness, which is about self-discipline, as we talked about, expedition opportunities for challenge and adventure, project-based opportunities, which are about developing self-reliance and self-discipline, and service, which was aimed at moving from pity to compassion towards other people. So I've kind of whizzed through a lot there in terms of Hahn and his philosophy. I think it's fascinating, and obviously I could keep talking for some time. This is a book that I wrote with a graduate student several years ago about Hahn, that kind of captures a lot of that background and his philosophy, which I think is intriguing. And these are the badges that people got on the original Murray badge scheme. He developed this badge scheme at Gordonston, and then that developed into the Outward Bound C School, which then developed into the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And to this day, people receive badges very similar to these, of a bronze, a silver, and a gold when they achieve their Duke of Edinburgh Award. In fact, my niece has just completed her gold award and went to Buckingham Palace recently to receive the award at an event there, which was obviously a big excitement for her. So Outward Bound now, there's just to talk a little bit about where that's grown from. In 1941, he started that first school in North Wales, and now Outward Bound operates across 35 different countries around the world, 6 continents, and there are 38 different schools. And you can see, probably not very clearly on the map, but you can also see on the Outward Bound International website a list of all of those schools in different countries around the world. And I suppose, to me, Outward Bound has been part of my blood from from being very young, and something that I've just always been very interested in, trying to understand the process of Outward Bound, and then also to think about and to get to grips with what its role and purpose is across the world. So I was delighted when we were successful in our bid for funding to the John Templeton Foundation to undertake this 3-year project with colleagues from the University of Utah and Clemson, and with my colleagues at Outward Bound International, which is if you like, it's the umbrella organization who support all of the Outward Bound schools around the world. And so the project is, I think it's a fairly ambitious project, or it feels as if it is at the moment. We wrote this application for funding support from the Templeton Foundation, and then went through several iterations. And then when the word came through that we got the money, we reread it and had to check what we'd promised we would do. And I broke out into a cold sweat at that point, but we've recovered from that, and we're now into the first year of the project. And the rationale really is around this kind of idea of character and what is character. And Outward Bound International across all the different schools is an interesting place to study this, because they all draw on the Hahn philosophy, but they interpret it in different ways and adapt it in different ways to operate in different countries. And so one of the kind of foundations is this idea of Aristotelian philosophy, which is his concept of phronesis, which is normally translated into practical wisdom or practical judgment. And that, in my mind, is one of the main aims of youth development work in the outdoors, and in my view, a quality that we want to inspire into young people and future generations. And so this idea of how do we develop and nurture character or good judgment, practical wisdom in young people, and how does that connect to another concept of Aristotle's, which he saw as being intimately connected, which is eudaimonia, which is this idea of health and well-being, or living the good life, and living a meaningful life. And so the whole of the project is really around these two foundations, if you like, these philosophical foundations. And on the basis that we live in increasingly multicultural societies, and so understanding culture is of crucial importance to us, and thinking about how we work with people across different cultures without stereotyping too much, although of course stereotypes exist for a reason, and often a good reason. So these are the purposes of the project. I'm not going to read them to you. I'll just give you a moment to have a quick read of those yourselves. So this third part is particularly interesting to me, because I'm really interested in trying to maximize the impact of research, and that's something that's characterized my whole career. Really has been about saying, how do we help people to do a better job when they're faced with a group of people to lead in the outdoors for a week or for a month or for 3 months. How do we help them to do a better job of what they do? The other part of the project that I find really interesting is that we're using as one of the organizing conceptual frameworks for the project is this World Cultural Map, which comes from the World Values Survey, which characterizes different countries on the basis of values. And so one of the parts about Outward Bound as a great partner for this is that Outward Bound have schools in every category on the World Values Map. And so so we're selecting countries for phase 2 of the project, partially using this map and their location on that map. This is our overview of our methods, which academics, as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, love to talk about methods. Phase 1, we're doing some surveys. So we've been doing some surveys over the last few months, and we've got a phase 2 of the first survey is about to go out. And we're using that to help us inform which schools to do case studies of in the second phase. And in May, we're going to do a first pilot of a case study in Singapore, and then we'll be identifying 6 to 8 schools around the world where we'll do case studies and visit them and write those case studies. And we're trying to, if you like, identify case studies that are on the edges of practice and on the edges of the values map that I just showed. So that's the plan. Of course, as research goes, things change, but that's where we are at the moment. And so far, things are going wonderfully well, very smoothly, and very lucky to collaborate with colleagues in Clemson and Utah and Outward Bound International, because they're just great people to work with. This is a little bit about Outward Bound and their kind of, if you like, their philosophy, which is around people, place, and process. That's the kind of map that people use to talk about what's going on and to try and explain that. And that is obviously adjusted to different places. This is an image in Oman, in the desert, in the Sharqiya sands in Oman. And obviously the practices there need to be somewhat different to the practices in other countries around the world too, and adjusted. Outward Bound have a theory of change model. I'll not go into that in detail, but if people are interested in that, I'm happy to share these slides. And as Paul said before, it's recorded. And most of Outward Bound is around outdoor activities of some kind. Sometimes that's sea kayaking if there's no water. Sometimes it's walking in the mountains, might be climbing, abseiling, all kinds of different activities that they use, but they're all around this idea of developing good judgment in people, place, and process combined, and values development. So that's, I've tried to keep things short. Paul hasn't cut me off, so I think I haven't gone too far over time. I would love to hear questions, and I'd like to say thank you very much for having me. It's great to have this opportunity to talk to you.
All right, Pete, thanks for that presentation. If you have any questions for Pete, you can drop them in the Q&A function here in Zoom or in the chat. We will be monitoring both. If you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and drop your questions in the comment section. Pete, first question from Wendy. Wendy wants to know, what's the most difficult thing you've had to handle on an Outward Bound trip, and what did you learn from that experience?
Thanks, Wendy. I love this question. There are so many different answers that I could give to this. I think the lesson that I keep learning every time I go on an expedition, lead an Outward Bound course, is a combination of everybody comes with their own baggage. Everybody comes from their own perspective, their own angle, their own reason for being there. And there is the best way I've found to deal with that is to try and come alongside people. So to be just with people. And, you know, one of the things that I love is walking and talking, or canoeing and talking, or cycling and talking. And I love the rhythm of walking with people and just talking and not being in a rush, you know. So the nice thing about being on an Outward Bound course is that it's often for a week or longer, and you have plenty of opportunity to talk and to circle around to conversations, and to sometimes to walk in silence with people and just think, walk with them, come back around, and next day say, oh, I was thinking about this, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's probably the most important lesson. I'm not sure if it's, I suppose what I'm saying is that the most challenging part of working with people in the outdoors is not the technical components, but it's normally the interpersonal relationships and having time to be with people and to understand people. And I think that's so important in life. You know, that's kind of served me well in working in academia and teaching and research and listening.
So I would imagine these Outward Bound courses have people of varying abilities, varying levels of fitness. How do you ensure that all participating get out of the course what they're looking to get out of it?
Well, there are lots of different ways. And two of those things I would say regular conversations. So checking in with the group in the morning, in the evening, talking to them and figuring out what it is that they need, want, and it normally doesn't take people to communicate that to you. And then I suppose the other thing is something that I really enjoy is, for example, on a backpacking course, typically people start off by saying, let's all carry the same amount. So we'll divide up the food for the week, and you take your share, and you take your share, and you take your share, and do the same with the tent, and the same with the stoves, and all that kind of thing. And then people start walking, and then realize at the end of the first day or the second day, actually, Paul, you're stronger than me, and so you can carry more. So there's not much point in you standing around waiting for me, right? Because we're all carrying the same amount. So maybe you carry a little bit more of my tent, and that means we can actually walk together and you're not standing around waiting. And so those kind of ideas of moving from fairness or equality, justice, equity, and need, and moving around those principles is something that I think is really useful, and obviously has all kinds of overlaps into everyday life. So that's kind of the way in which I tend to deal with those things, is through conversation and figuring out. I think, there's always lessons to learn.
So Pamela has a question. You touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but values vary across cultures. What values are critical for leaders in different cultures, and what behaviors demonstrate those values?
I love that question, and I don't honestly know the answer. In some ways, that's what this project is about. That's kind of what we're trying to find out. I think there are some core values, but the behaviors vary in different cultures. And so, one of my favorite sayings is nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. And I think that is something that I've seen working across outward bound schools around the world. And I think that's because it's, most people who go on an outward bound course go because they're searching for something, they're looking for something, they're doing it for a reason. And often that caring environment is what enables them to explore what it is that they're working on. So if it's a 17, 18-year-old, it's often figuring out what they want to do with their life in the next phases. If it's an adult course and it's maybe 30, 40-year-olds, sometimes it's dealing with a midlife crisis. It's about what does the next phase of life look like, or those kinds of things. So Pamela, I'm pretty sure I'm not answering your question, but I'm hoping that in 2 years I can give you a much better answer because of this research that we're doing.
What is and I think you might have just answered this question, but what's the time frame for the study? Is it 2 years?
So it's a 3-year project. So we've got about another 2.5 years left to go on it. So we've only just really started. We're just kind of getting into our stride, as it were. And things are going to get, my life is going to get very, very busy in the next 6 months. I can feel it coming. So yeah, but it's very exciting. It feels like complete luxury to do this research because it's work that I've been wanting to do pretty much my whole career.
So MR wants to dig a little bit into the accessibility of these kind of and from a socioeconomic perspective, the ratio of disadvantaged to affluent on the average excursion, and how do you make them available to people who might not have the means?
So I can't speak for every outward bound school around the world, because that in some respects varies by each school. So some of the schools very much work with people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I'm not sure if that's the politically correct term because these things change regularly, but there are some schools. So for example, the Outward Bound Chesapeake Bay and the Philadelphia Outward Bound School work very much with inner city young people. Some schools work with rural populations who are also disadvantaged in various ways. And some schools work with young people from very well-off backgrounds. A lot of schools use scholarships to support opportunities for everybody to be able to attend.
Right.
And some schools also use development funds and that kind of thing, or donations and gifts. So, for example, the Outward Bound School in Oman has an endowment that allows them to offer free courses to a lot of people. So it just varies. Sorry.
So this was established in the early 1940s. Since then, different generations have had access to Outward Bound. Different generations have, you talked about stereotypes, right? Different generations have different stereotypes. There's a question in here. Has it been hard to establish the idea of the individual putting the group first in our culture of individuality, where everyone has a specific food plan, is catered by technology and society for their uniqueness, right? Maybe a little bit of a commentary in this question about Gen Z, but I'm interested in the answer to that question, but also kind of what have the arcs been across other generations and how Outward Bound has had impact?
Yeah. So there's probably several different levels of answering that question. So one is that I think that one of the things that I'm starting to see already with this research, and which doesn't really surprise me a lot, is that different schools promote different values. And so Outward Bound in Singapore, every young person in Singapore goes on an Outward Bound course. It's funded through the National Youth Council, and it's because the Prime Minister of Singapore went on an Outward Bound course when he was a young man. Now, the values that they promote at Outward Bound in Singapore are written out. They're sent to people before they go, and they're told that this is about building resilience and problem-solving skills and so on and so forth. There's a list. In the States, the tendency is to say, this is an opportunity for you to explore your values. But what they are is not going to be prescribed to you.
Right.
Now, to me, that's a very, obviously, I'm not from the States originally, I'm from the UK. That's a very American approach to things. You can believe whatever you want. You can think whatever you want. You can, it's the land of the free, it's opportunity. And so I think those values are embedded within the practices of the different schools, even though the schools often don't realize it because you can't see it when you're part of it. So that's, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's one part of the question. The other part of the question about the impact of outward bound courses and expeditions and these kind of things is probably a topic for another talk if you invite me back, which you probably won't for talking too much. But some of the work that I've done has been tracking people down 50 and 60 years later after they went on an Outward Bound course, and talking to them and saying, tell me about that course. If this was really a life-changing experience, presumably you can tell me about it now, which is just fascinating to hear those stories and to hear people reflect on how that experience changed the direction of travel of their life just by a few degrees. And so that's one of the ways in which we think about these experiences of just adjusting just by a few degrees when you're young, and then obviously that separates and makes a big difference later in life.
So that goes into my next two questions. You say when you're young, what is a good age to encourage a young person to apply for Outward Bound program? Do they have a choice of the locations that they participate in it? What is kind of the wheelhouse? You talked about programs for youth, programs for adults. What's the best age?
I mean, part of me wants to say it's always a good time. It's always a good age. I think in my mind, the ideal is somewhere in the kind of 15 to 25 age window to do that. And I think that, you know, there are so many different choices of outward bound courses. If anybody on the call is interested, if you Google Outward Bound or Outward Bound International, you will find enormous choice of short courses, longer courses, courses that are all kayaking, courses that are mixed activities, and on the choices go. I think it's a great idea to do, you know, a five-day Outward Bound course somewhere in the 14, 15, 16 kind of age group, and then, you know, think about later on. Certainly that's what my stepdaughter, that's what we're trying to encourage her into in the next couple of years to do one.
That's great. So the second part of that question is, you talked about a little change here or a little change there can change the directory. You know, the question from Bill is, in America, we're struggling with a lot of young people involved in substance abuse. How far along into the recovery road must a candidate be to join an outward bound group or course?
I'm not sure I can speak to that with great authority. I can speak to it with in most OB courses are about what I would characterize as enrichment courses. They deal with enriching people's lives. They're not dealing with deficit issues, if you like. And so there's a whole area of practice in the outdoors that is around helping people deal with addictions of various kinds. And those courses, that's what I would recommend for anybody who has an addiction. I don't know what it would, there's so many variables involved in that question. It's very hard to answer any more specific.
Understood. Time for one more question here. Are you seeing a change in the COVID youth demographics versus prior years in terms of coping skills, willingness to meet a challenge? I'm not sure if you have any perspective on that.
I guess what I would say would be the same kind of conversation that I hear about students as well, which is I find young people inspiring to be around, and I think they often get a bad rap in the press. They often get tarnished as having all kinds of problems, and my experience of working with young people is that they have enormously complicated lives and societies to navigate and do an incredible job. And when I look at, when I work with students at Penn State, or when I work with students in the outdoors in various outward bound schools, I find it utterly inspiring to hear the kind of things that they are thinking about and talking about. And so it might just be some kind of optimistic disposition that I have, but I think there's all kinds of great things in young people in the future.
Absolutely. Well, Pete, if someone is interested in learning more about your work with Outward Bound or Outward Bound here at Penn State, where can they go?
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. If they want to contact me, they can do so just through the Penn State websites or through the Hahn consortium. I'm in the College of Health and Human Development, and my department is Recreation, Park and Tourism Management. And I can I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to email me. I would love to hear from anybody, and I'd love to hear about different outward bound courses. I'm enjoying seeing the notes in the chat of where people have been and what they've done. It's fantastic.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you for presenting today on the virtual speaker series, and we want to thank all of you for tuning in. As a reminder, you can view a full listing of all of our events, both online and in person, at our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you again for joining us and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are